This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
I call to order the August 28th meeting of the Waterways and Parks Commission. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the June 26th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
John, a second.
Second.
Kate, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. New business, item A will be postponed again because a number of members are unable to attend. Pat will have to prod them with a stick or something to get them all here for one time. So we will postpone that until a future business meeting. So we will proceed to item B. Recommendation to approve vacation of a portion of Newton Street from Wilcox Street to the Chippewa River. Dave?
Okay, thank you. This is, usually our street vacations are pretty straightforward, but this one had a little bit of a different path, so I'll go through the history and then answer some questions if people have those. This portion in question is Newton Street from Wilcox to the Chippewa River, and we're in the area between the Water Street Bridge and Lake Street Bridge down in the 3rd Ward. This began with a request from an adjacent property owner to consider releasing a utility easement that was in that corridor, and a number of our city mapping levels that show our property lines within our GIS and our data sets for GIS showed that Newton Street had been vacated and it was split between the two adjacent property owners graphically. So with that easement request to have the easement released, our professional land surveyor, the city surveyor, does research and gets all the property history on it, and through his research was not able to come across a council action or a recording of Newton Street being vacated in that area, even though the maps that we had shown it. The petitioners that had petitioned to have this presented had some documents from 1915 when the original house was built here that listed it as being vacated, but we don't have council action. We don't have any kind of official elected body action proof that would verify that this had occurred. So we don't know if it was simply a mistake that was perpetuated through the different mappings and the different things throughout the years, or if it was originally intended. So we looked at council records all the way as far back as we could. We looked at Register of Deeds, any recordings, and we couldn't come across anything that showed that there was an official elected body action to vacate the street. So when we found that it was not vacated, instead of an easement release, we initiated a staff initiated vacation in April. When we have issues like this, it routes around to the managers for the city. So the department heads with Mr. Pippinger and myself and legal, finance, admin, city manager. And at that time, it was compared against the goals with the comprehensive plan and the Waterways plan, which spell out basically to protect and provide public access along the waterfront areas. I believe it's the Waterways plan that identifies having a linear park or green public access along the Chippewa River from the Dells Pond Dam down to Claremont. This is obviously right in the middle of a 3rd Ward neighborhood. There's a house here, there's a house here. So the likelihood that a trail will be going through here right now would depend upon the property owners willingly selling either property or easement rights for a trail that follows along the Chippewa River. So it's unlikely, but with the comprehensive plan and our Waterways plan, it spells out, tries to lay goals for 25, 50, 75 years in the future. So laying a street vacation and removing the city ownership and the city access to the river, comparing them with the goals of some of our official plans, city management was not in favor of a city-initiated street vacation, or staff initiated. So then it went into a property owner initiated, where they have rights by state law to initiate a street vacation, which they have done and followed the process for that, with getting petitions signed by the adjacent property owners and a certain number of adjacent property owners up Newton Street. And that has started in motion the process of a plan commission hearing, a public hearing at the city council meeting, and then also a vote by the city council in September. So the first step in the vacation process is to come to the Waterways and Parks Commission, because it is it does have relation to a waterway. So there's over 100 years worth of showing that it has been vacated, but there isn't any record of that original council action for that. And for that, that's why the staff is not in favor of granting the street vacation. We have offered, but nothing has been final. One thing the city is willing to offer is a permanent encroachment in that area. And a permanent encroachment that's given by the city still could be revoked with a certain time frame and a certain process. But it would give the property owners the right to use it as a park, or not a park, but a lawn. They just would not be able to put a structure on it. And then if 50 years down the road, 75 years down the road, a trail does go through, then the city would exercise its ownership at that point and provide, presumably access to the corner of Newton Street and Wilcox for the neighborhood to access the trail there. So that's one option, and the other option is to retain. If it's vacated, typically it takes another action to release the utility easement. So even if a street is vacated, we by default keep the easement rights for utilities. If this were vacated, we would seek to at least keep an access easement. So at some point in the future, access would be reserved for the public good to access the water. And I guess one other thing, just to try and spell out both sides on here, that the property owners were special assessed for the street improvement on Wilcox Street when that was constructed, I think in the last 10 years. That was before I joined the city. So it's not as straightforward, but that's where we came up with our recommendation in here in the paragraph. City staff is not in support of the vacation, and it's for those goals of the comprehensive and waterways plan. I'll take any questions.
Would it be, has it been considered like a swap, like if we were to get the part of the land adjacent to the river across the properties, and then do you know what I mean? Can I put it on
I'm
there?
not sure. Could you show that aerial? We do have an aerial that shows the houses. So,
Yeah, so I know that it's been a long time goal of the city to be looking ahead to acquire land along the river. And so has it been discussed to acquire the land along the river of the two properties and the public right of way in exchange for the public right of way that's not adjacent to the river?
I guess we haven't approached the adjacent property owners. I see that they're here this evening. I don't know if that would be, I think that would be an appropriate council action for that. Because when a street is vacated, at least our land surveyors interpretation, it goes back to adjacent property owners. So it's not, DOT sometimes sells remnant parcels, and when the city gets land deeded to us with a plat for free where we're not purchasing it like a highway purchases. So I'm not sure that, I think if this is vacated, it goes back, and I think that is independent of a separate transaction to purchase on each side. We had another similar situation like this earlier this year north of Riverview Drive, and that property owner was asked if he would be interested in selling the trail easement, because that went from the north crossing and would provide a similar access eventually to the Riverview Park. That property owner declined, but we didn't link the two to make one dependent on the other.
So, do I understand correctly that over the last 100 years, kind of operationally, the city's been functioning as though it had been vacated?
Correct, we had a storm sewer line that was in here, and that was redone in the past. So it's common for us to have utility easements through properties. So that's what the city has been operating under, is that we have our utilities there, but the street, for even us going into the easement release, me as a city engineer, looking at our graphical records, it appeared to be vacated, and that's why we started going down that road. It wasn't until we did the legal research, like a title work or something like that, that it showed that we didn't have that record. It shows up in a 1940s plat book, but it shows up as a block on here. It doesn't show that it was attached to both. So it's kind of all over the place throughout history. But operationally, we haven't been mowing it like it's a city parcel. We, up until '98, I'm sure our public works department at that time was maintaining that storm sewer line, making sure it was operational, but we weren't mowing the lawn, doing anything on top of it.
And have the adjacent property owners also been just functioning as though that's their property?
Yep, there's a place that would be on the adjacent property owner to the south side of the right of way. There haven't been any buildings built on it, but at least temporary buildings. Yeah, it's been mowed. You can't, when you drive through there, you don't see the remnants of a street in there.
Yeah, so they chose not to mow it for some reason.
No, I think it's mowed. I think
Oh, I thought you said.
no,
the city wasn't
the
mowing it.
city hasn't mowed it. The property owners
I got
mowed it as if it was theirs.
What will change if we voted not to vacate?
If we voted not to vacate and it was a street, then the city should operate like it is a piece of property for the city, and we should be maintaining it or mowing it, with our standard mowing, if it qualifies with our mowing policy for that. The property owners could, if they would like a permanent encroachment, we would grant them a permanent encroachment. They can put swing sets and gardens and mow it and treat it like their lawn, sprinklers. And then at some point in the future, if a trail ever did go through. So there could be zero change of
So there's
use of
not
it.
like a plan for like even a sidewalk to the river?
We don't have a plan right now for that. It's just that 50,000 view plans that are spelled out in the comprehensive plan on the Waterways plan to preserve access to waters in the city.
So our two options would be, or three options, would be to vacate to a permanent encroachment.
You could either vote to vacate it without any conditions, or recommend vacating with no conditions, and then that would just expand the property. Vote not to vacate, and then it would be the recommendation to not go forward. Not vacate and encourage the property owners. We can't force a permanent encroachment on them, but regardless of it, we would offer a permanent encroachment, and the city council ultimately grants permanent encroachments. Or it could be vacated and the city could retain easement rights for access easements for a trail along here, and then access at some point in the future when the trail is built to let people come from that corner to it. So four options on there. So.
Tom?
You probably said it at the start, David, but how is this discovered?
Adjacent property owner had requested that we abandon our utility easements because the stormwater line is no longer in use over there. So if we're not using it, it's been rerouted, we have a different outfall. We don't need a utility easement in there for the future. This was originally platted, I think, to provide another crossing when the Water Street crossing needed to be replaced at some point in the future, way back when. So when we do that, we look at all the property records, and our professional land surveyor on staff, who's a city surveyor, whenever we get a street vacation, he does all of the property descriptions in our legal land descriptions in that process to make sure that we get the paperwork right when we're either vacating or giving easements or removing easements for that. So it was discovered with an easement release request.
You know, there's a legal term that slips me about if someone is using a land, what is it?
Adverse possession.
Adverse possession.
Adverse possession is what I'm thinking about, where if you use this land and no one is really, and it's clearly spelled out the parameters within statute in terms of what the criteria that has to be met for adverse possession to take place. But this just seems to me a little bit like an adverse possession where for a long time people have thought that this was their property and everybody thought it was their property, correct?
At least, in the city, I mean, we had an easement there. I mean, I don't think anybody disputed that. We knew we had utility rights to be in there, but as far as on top, it appeared that it was a discontinued road.
To the point where they paid for the
Street assessment.
upgrade of the street.
Special assessments. Correct.
John?
To Pat, didn't we hear at an earlier meeting that there was no inclusion of a path along there in the master plan, south, downriver from Lake Street?
That's correct. Our trails map in terms of showing future greenway, in terms of specific location, does not show a proposed greenway between Thorpe Drive up to Lake Street. There is general references in the comprehensive plan about providing access to the waterways, but our actual proposed greenway does not show this on that map.
Is that because the city doesn't want a trail there, or that we're at the point where like we just don't own enough land on that side of the river to be like
Well,
realistically?
When we did the 2005 comp plan and then the 2015 comp plan, we looked at different sections along the river, and I think the feeling was at that point is that it would be too difficult to acquire, too expensive to acquire properties for a greenway in that segment, so that's why it was not included.
If a trail were to come down along the river, would there be adequate access off of Marston?
There may. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, I thought, well, food items. Remember Marston is,
The trail would be
here's,
right.
this
right
is Thorpe Drive here, Marston, and then Wilcox. And then this extends up along up to Lake Street here.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
You said that the property owners were special assessed for that land.
The 33 feet for each of those property owners for that stretch, their special assessments for Wilcox included an extra 33 feet.
Would that special assessment be returned?
Yeah, it was offered to be returned if they would like it. It has not been. It was offered to you, Anton. I offered it to you, and so did Pat Laura.
Well, I'll be happy to make a comment about that.
Sure, go ahead.
With adding this land, or like officially having this land in like private ownership, affect our taxes of that land?
I guess that would be an assessment question. I don't know what it would do to their property. I mean, I guess I wouldn't comment on that. So.
Tom?
Excuse me, do we know, have they been paying taxes on that property?
I don't have their legal descriptions, but I believe their legal descriptions describe their parcels plus describe half of the vacated street. It's unclear whether the property description that their assessments are based on includes just the legal for their property or if they have a separate one. We didn't come across any legal description that with meets and bounds that would go up, over, around to the middle. So I don't know if the assessors included that narrative in the south half of that street in the overall square footage when they calculated that.
And maybe they were just untaxed, that'd be another option.
Yeah, and I think in the overall scheme of things, that small amount would probably have a very small effect on the overall regular assessments. But as far as special assessments, we have records of that was included for special assessments for streets.
So just on that point, in the city records, every square inch has some kind of ownership, right? And of the city, it doesn't show ownership for that particular.
The written records that are contained at the clerk of courts for the official property records at the county does not have that listed as, it has it listed, it's right of way, there's nothing that says that it was vacated on there. There are descriptions on deeds that reference that it's vacated, but there isn't a supporting document to show that that wasn't a mistake that was perpetuated over time. Or if it was, that's why we look for council actions, because we found very common with parking and speed limits that there were decisions that were made to change the speed limit from 45 to 40, and that's an ordinance, and that's in ordinance. So we go through, we find an inconsistency with what's signed versus what's in our table of ordinances, and sometimes it goes through council and the table isn't updated. So that's why we look to see if there's an agenda or a vote or something that the body took action on it. And if the body took action and it wasn't recorded because staff at the time didn't properly record it, then it would be, I think I know it would be my recommendation, and I'm sure that the rest of the managers, that we would follow through on a staff-supported vacation because it was voted on 100 years ago, and if staff dropped the ball recording it, we would follow through on that elected body's decision at the time. But we weren't able to find anything with the actual recording or anything on the voting side to prove or disprove that took place. And with our professional land surveyor's opinion, as kind of our records expert in engineering, showing it over graphically without the paperwork isn't enough to say that it was vacated. It still needs that vote.
John?
When you mentioned that like 100 years is there's no record of voting on that, what is the staff recommendations about this vacation of this?
Our recommendation was, I guess the default recommendation is to not support the vacation because it does provide access to the water. If it were vacated, at a minimum, I would want, I think it would be in the public's best interest, and I would recommend at least having a trail easement along the water for at some point in the future. If a trail does go in 50, 75, 100 years from now, if that's not maintained now, it's virtually impossible to do it. A lot of things change with attitudes, in 50 years. It may be the property owners at that time, 50 years from now, may see a benefit with having a trail that eventually could link these houses with the Riverwalk Trail going to Lake Street. You could end up at Haymarket Plaza, or you could go down to University the other direction. So that's really, and with the state of Wisconsin right now, you cannot use eminent domain for trail purposes. So you wouldn't, like future council or future bodies would not be able to condemn unless that state statute were changed if they wanted a trail in the future. Like I think it was brought up, and Pat, a trail is not on the city official map. We don't have anything in CIP. I agree with that assessment that it would be probably one of the more expensive, difficult trails unless you had buy-in by all the neighbors that said we really want it and they would embrace it. Like some businesses donate easements or land along the water for a trail if we agree to build a trail. So it's nothing that's coming down the pike. It's just reserving that future opportunity, potentially 50 years, 25 years, whatever that would come through.
Would there be a downside to vacating it and retaining what you mentioned, some kind of easement along the river and a public access easement that's a continuation of Newton Street, basically, you retain some option for some kind of a.
I don't think there would be, I don't think there would be a downside with that. We have the Riverwalk Trail that goes from Barstow Street to Haymarket Plaza, right along the Eau Claire River. That's on easement. We don't own that land, but that portion the property owners gave us an easement. So we can have access to the waterways through easement rights instead of through property rights.
Just to clarify, so let's say that teacher people on the city council decided that trail would go, we should have a trail. So by us reserving that right, or the city council reserving that right, and it says 33 feet?
It'd say 66 feet. So
Right.
you'd have this,
Yeah. So
this would be the trail and then this would be vacated.
But it would be 66 feet that the city would not need to purchase
Correct, yep.
versus, but the landowners on adjacent on both sides would need to be willing to sell. Right?
No, we would retain those rights.
So what happens if you decide to put a trail in there?
Yep.
What happens?
Oh, yes, correct. Yeah, these property owners would have to sell. Yes, I thought you meant these property owners would have to sell for the easement within here.
So we're really talking 66 feet.
Correct. You have the rights for 66 feet of a maybe 800 to 900 foot trail at some point in the future if it goes up to the Powell Properties is currently. But yes, it would require buy-in from the adjacent property owners to do that. I don't think that that's present today.
John? Oh, sorry.
So we have the option to keep that, maintain that, and then have the adjacent property owner have encroachment to use it. Do we have that option?
That's one option, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Or to recommend that.
Yeah, kind of follow up that. Just for clarification, what you said already, it sounds like some options here, and correct me if I'm mistaken, is one, just not vacate. Two, to not vacate, but give the party owners permanent easement where which they could continue to use it as if it were there, but it would then be open to the future to being used otherwise.
Correct.
And then also, if you do vacate, you could keep a trail easement right on
A public access easement.
public easement.
Yep.
Is that all, or there are four?
The fourth would be to vacate it with no conditions. Just to, then it would be treated with the same treatment as the adjacent properties on each side.
Okay, thank you.
I know it's a lot of options. I tried to put out all the different things out here for you to consider, so that those are the four that we thought.
For me personally, I would like the second idea that keep that, city maintain that, and have the owner, the adjacent owner using that. So future if we decide to put a sidewalk, bike trail, whatever into this, we have, so we don't have to buy, approach to the property owner to buy back. So I like that idea,
Dave, may I just clarify, they seem similar to me. The not vacating but giving the landowner permanent easement would allow trail in the future, and then also vacating but keeping a trail easement, right, would also give the city a right to the trail.
Correct.
In the future, but the details are a little different.
Typically, the easements aren't the full 66 feet. We would keep a 15 or 20 foot wide easement for the trail. So it would be in a specific corridor, you know, if an access easement, and with the two access easements, there's two parts of it. One would be going north-south along the river, and the second one to consider would be connection out. You know, you could consider providing this and not providing that, but you would pick a spot where you would want the easement to come through there. So if we retain it, then it can go throughout the whole 66 feet. So if it was vacated but an easement were retained, then the part in this area that doesn't have an easement on it, it's just private property. There's no public rights remaining on it for vacation.
Kirk?
And until such time as a trail were to be built along the river, there'd be no reasonable expectation at all that you exercise the option to build a pedestrian access.
Correct.
That place.
The only thing that I could see would be in the Waterways plan spells out in downtown at the end of the streets where we have the right of way that goes down Gray and Main and Gibson and Grand. Grand has a bridge, but they spell to have overlooks over the Chippewa River and a spot for art or whatnot. This would be an opportunity potentially. It's not a commercial setting; it's a neighborhood setting. We don't have plans for that, but that would be the only thing if there was a little sidewalk or something and you had a neighborhood overlook over the river. It's a pretty steep bank, so. But otherwise, yeah, correct.
I think we had a discussion previously, or a vote about Gibson Street. I think we already vacated that one.
Gibson Street, that was vacated here, and then that was kept in order.
There was a retention for a trail, but there was a trail on the plan. And in fact, it's been approved and it's going to be built. And Gibson, there's people walking around there. There was a public parking element to it. And with this, it's basically somebody's backyard. I don't think they want somebody going down there to view the river. I wouldn't want somebody behind my house that the rest of the city couldn't see. People go down to the end of Gibson Street and look around. Everybody, there's, all around the river, they can see what they're doing. If somebody goes down there behind those houses, we don't know what they're doing.
Pat, can you put up the aerial again? Just show the number of properties that would need to be affected if we were going to put a trail in.
Yeah, let me go to that. So this is Marston here, so there'd be the one property here, 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 so that's 3 properties. 4, 5, 6. 4 is the Severson owned property. 5 would be the YMCA. 6 would be the Masonic Temple. 7 would be the Lake Street Apartments.
I'm glad with John, where I just don't think that's the most trail-friendly part of the river.
It's pretty steep. When we had walked through and looked at it, you're in a boardwalk situation through there. I mean,
and it just seems to me that we lived with this for about 100 years. And we're saying if we're going to build a trail, but it seems like that's unlikely. It seems to me that we should just vacate.
Are there any questions for Dave? No, thank you. Are the petitioners here and would you like to speak to the commission? If you could please state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Anton Smets. My wife Ray Schilling is with me. We are the owners of 28 Newton, that is this property. Mr. Morganson and Ms. Aspenson are here, who are the owners of the adjacent property. Thank you for listening to us. I would like to start with mentioning that the Department of Engineering and Mr. Solberg and I have been sort of talking since March. And I would like to emphasize how grateful I am for his very professional and kind availability to discuss about the variety of issues. I have no issues with how the engineering department handled our request. We fundamentally disagree about the recommendation, but that doesn't mean that I do not understand their position. I would like to speak a little bit about two aspects that I'd like you to think about, and let me preface it by saying that I'm a little bit worried when you might say, I like this idea or this idea. I think you should get the whole picture, because not in any way or form to be deceitful, but Mr. Solberg did leave out a couple of things that need to be said. And I'm going to address these issues, and then Mr. Mogensen will speak a little bit more about what we do have that supports our position. In principle, I can understand that the city wants to do everything they can to provide access to the river. We live on the river, we love the river. My wife and I bike 4 times a week, thanking the city for making all of this possible. We understand that it is their task to maybe tell you to make sure that river access should be protected in the future. I feel that it is our task to tell you that even though that is a very sound idea, it should not universally apply for every situation. There are situations where that is not a reasonable conception. Later on, we will talk about how the bike path, in our humble opinion, absolutely is not a feasible idea in this stretch. But let me first talk a little bit about what was not mentioned. What was not mentioned is that we feel quite strongly that even though Mr. Morgensen owns the property only recently, that the Rybekis for sure paid property taxes over the property. The fact that the city is unsure whether Ray and I paid property taxes doesn't mean we didn't do it. You know, what they do agree is that we paid special assessments, and they're just not sure about whether we paid property taxes. Well, I think we did, and it's not just that we mowed it. We, both of our water sprinkler systems are in that 33 feet and have been for a long time. My main distributor system is in there. There was never any doubt that this was a vacated area. In fact, and I think you should know this, I spoke to Mr. Borer, and so did Mr. Morgensen. Mr. Borer is the plat guru of the city, and he told me and Mr. Morgensen, I'm quite sure this was vacated, but things were lost very often in the early 1900s, and you have a situation where they just lost the papers, but everybody knew it. In 1915, as Mr. Morgensen will show, the Wilcox House was built, and it does not only say Newton vacated, it was stamped by the city for approval. I thought that when they stamp things for approval, that means they know that the vacation took place. Maybe they had the papers, we don't know. But just because they can't find the papers doesn't mean we didn't own that land. That's at least should be clear. The other part that concerns me is that, first of all, we wouldn't have this discussion if Ray and I hadn't asked for the easement removal. We would not have been here, it would have never been discussed. It just started there. And what happened first? The first thing that happened was that the city told us that they supported the easement and that we didn't have to do anything. Ms. Ness called me and said, I'll take care of it. It just needs to be on the city's agenda. I'll do that June 10th. Then she called me 2 weeks later and said, well, we sort of can't find the original vacation, but I'll take care of that too. You don't need to pay anything. You do not need to select any signatures. If you want to show up June 10th, that's fine. Well, unilaterally, the city decided to change that opinion in April or May and canceled the city council hearing without giving us the right to speak to the city council about why did this change. To this date, we don't really know why something that was not an issue that they were going to take care of changed into we can't do this. It seems a little awkward. Well, we did, of course, do the filing because it was our only option. Also, when you read what the intention is, there is talk about river access, but a high emphasis on the bike path. Other things that are being talked about is a walkway to the river where people could, I guess, walk through our backyards and look and enjoy the river. And I think that's sort of it. Well, what we have been talking about the properties initially was about our two properties. And we worked hard in our lives. Our houses are expensive. We're talking about millions of dollars to acquire them. The Immelman's house isn't any cheaper either. Interestingly, the idea that you need to protect for the future bike path between Thorpe Drive and Lake Street, well, then we need to talk about Severson, and we need to talk about the other two properties that come along. I know that Mr. Stuart Schaefer worked really hard to get permission to build some small balconies on his Severson home that he is rebuilding into apartments. And he was denied that because the building is in the water. So is the last building before the street, and we don't know what the idea of the, and so is the Masonic Temple. There's just no other way to conceive of a bike path than to bolt it against the buildings that are standing in the water, that are being denied building balconies because they're in the water. It just adds up to be really weird. Not to mention that we would be talking about millions of dollars. You would have to buy the Immelmans, the Logansons, the Smets, the Severson, the YMCA, the two more. I mean, there needs to be some reason. Again, going back to my first point, we should protect our waterways, but really. One thing that people don't know is what this river looks like half of the year. I mean, I don't have the opportunity to show you videos, but we shoot videos of when the river is high. And literally, on the bank where this bike path would be, this river, at least for a month and a half a year, roars right up to the edge. The idea that somehow this would be a public area is really insane. It's just so incredibly dangerous if anybody would come anywhere near that. Luckily, we don't have children. I'm not even sure if I would have bought this property knowing that. I mean, the water is a wild factor. It is not like any other area. The bank goes straight down. I spoke to another official who said we need to protect the enjoyment and accessibility of the river. Well, we live right across from Owen Park. If you are in our yards and you look out, you see approximately 1,400 feet of accessible enjoyment. Beaches, the band shell, you name it. To say that the city of Eau Claire does not have access to that particular part of the river is really not fair. I'm going to ask Mr. Morgensen to take it from here. I just want to emphasize that we shouldn't be saying, let's not give these property back to the owners that they owned to begin with, because maybe we're going to build this bike path, which is entirely unpractical.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sorry.
How long have you owned your house in that?
11 years.
Okay. I don't think that what is your thought about not vacate and then let you use it as coaching in there, because for future it's not just the bike trail but the access from the Newton Street to the river. How do you feel that way?
I feel it's unfair. I feel this is our land. It's been taken away from us. I don't think there should be, it's not fair to us that because they cannot find a particular paper, that we should be okay with saying, oh well then, thank you for letting us use it, but it isn't ours. Especially since we paid taxes over it, we feel this is for us not an issue of asking for vacation. For us, this means that the city is trying to take our land away. So, with all respect for maybe thinking what is differently, if the land was never in the position that it was, and Mr. Solberg was very correct to inform you that this is a really unusual situation.
Can I ask a second question?
Go ahead.
When you purchased your house 11 years ago, have you acknowledged that this is not a part of your land?
No, it was entirely clear that Mr. Marquardt showed me the lot lines. In fact, there was a little discussion about the Ripekis being worried about the kids falling in the river, and they wanted to put up a fence. And they came to us and they asked if they could put the fence up at least to our lot line. And if you go look at our house, the 33-foot lot line is exactly where they built their fence. There was never any doubt that this was our land.
Kate?
So I hear that you feel like it's not fair, but operationally, how would this kind of change how you live on this land? It sounds like, and I guess the city can't confirm, but it sounds like you have been paying taxes, from your opinion, on this land. So the only difference that I can see is that you pay less taxes and you can still use the land the same as you would have before. Do you see any other sort of like operational differences other than paying?
I would like to have the freedom to explore options of my land just like you would.
And do you have any plans for that?
I might.
Okay, well, we might have a plan for a trail.
I might.
Okay.
I might not,
Sure.
but I feel I own land. I should have the option to consider options. Frankly, with due respect and speaking to your question, I think those are separate issues. I think it's not fair to make a decision on this speculating what I might or might not want to do with my land. I mean, the issue is simply, does it count that the history shows that we probably owned this land? And second, does it make any sense to say that the city master plan applies to this particular piece of land? That's what I think is the issue.
I'm just trying to get a sense of how
Yes.
this might change your life because, we don't want to be assuming, or we don't want to be like making assumptions about what you're planning to do, and you don't want to be making assumptions on what the city's planning to do, right? You're seeing it, and I see it exactly the same, and so I'm trying to get a sense of how your life might change in a real, tangible sense. So,
I would feel better about living in the city of Eau Claire that justice prevailed and there wasn't however professionally it was presented, there wasn't a change of mind in the speculation of what a plan may or may not be in terms of using the access of the river.
Kirk?
Would it be a reasonable compromise to have you occupy and own what you think you already own, and just to accommodate the city better and their records and their preferences and future plans, to have that easement along the river for some potential future trail, which you say is unbuildable and unlikely anyway?
Let me answer that for me. Mr. Mortensen needs and Ms. Aspenson need to answer for their property. Mr. Nick, in the conversation that I had with him, told me that it was an option that the vacation would have the clause that we cannot do anything with 33 feet off the high river bank, which would be the width of the maybe trail. I have no problems signing a paper to that extent, because in my heart I know that will never happen. Fine. If that is the compromise, I think I would agree to it. Sorry, Ray, I didn't ask you.
I'm not sure I have.
I just realized I shouldn't be saying this, but okay. Half of the shilling expense would be fine with it. Again, because, okay, then it is on record that we cannot do anything onerous that would make the trail impassable, and I would go to bed at night thinking nobody's going to build that. I'm not going to pay $7-8 million to buy these houses and anchor a little bike path to the Severson home that will wash away at the first flood.
Tom?
When you purchased your property 11 years ago, did you go back or have you gone back and checked the dimensions of your lot? And did it include this 33 feet or not?
The first thing that we did was going to the title agency to see if there was a title issue. Unfortunately, I shouldn't mention a name, but the person that did the deeds search, his business went under. And so we have some trouble with that. But John can maybe say something about it, but Mr. Wypecki, who bought the house 22 years ago, had a title search done with that understanding. Again, it was always clear. Now, in fact, let me add this observation to it. Every city plat shows the line between these as divided between the two of us. Always done that, except for a month ago. Somehow, somebody changed this a month ago. I don't feel good about that. I think somebody went in there and somehow in the discussion of this made a change that wasn't discussed, that wasn't voted on. If we talk about some sentiments of unfairness, I would add that to it.
I'd be curious in terms of some type of document. I mean, the property's been sold probably several times in the last 100 years, and can we get an idea as to whether it hasn't been purchased from the city, but it's changed hands from private party to private party?
Yes, it did, yeah.
And did that 66-foot strip divided in half, 33 feet each property, was that?
No title search ever suggested that there wasn't a vacation.
John?
Frankly, Mr. Fiedler, I would like to repeat that I do believe it was vacated. I agree with Mr. Bohr. The records got lost.
One other thing that when you buy your property, is it you bought by wholesale owners, or you bought by a realtor, or you bought by a wholesale owner, or you buy
A realtor.
Technically, I'm a realtor. Technically, when we list the property for sale, and when you bought it and go to the title company,
Yes.
they will do a research and they will tell you this is your approximately your property line, okay? And then you will be, if you do not agree with that, then you have to hire a survey to find out exactly where your property line is. I think that when the person who did your case did not do that correctly. I know that they have been in 100 years. That should be a records name. They say that this is the city owner, and they will be only this part in here. You know, that is the.
Well, in answer to your question, sir, that would not only apply to us, that would apply, like Mr. Fiedler said, to at least 4 or 5 different purchases. The house was built in 1915 by the son of Mr. Wilcox. I believe the Wilcox family owned it until the Wypeckys bought it. The Mogensen bought it with absolutely no indication that this was the case. Lee and Mary Marquardt did not buy it from Mr. Owen, who built it. There was an owner in between. Ray, do you know who the owner was? When we bought the property, we were shown where the line was. Sorry, sir, but not in our wildest dreams did we believe that there was some sort of an issue. You know, I mean, title searches are not anything like bedroom reading. You just assume it's okay.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Smith? If not, thank you for your time. Is there another member of the public who would like to speak to this? And please state your name and address for the record.
My name is John Mogensen. I recently purchased the property right here, and I sent you, or I gave you a couple handouts. Before I purchased it, I called, or I looked it up in the city records, and I've given you this one full handout that says Department of Public Works. Okay, so according to the Department of Public Works, you can see on the 3rd page that the street is divided. And then on the next page, it shows it again that it's divided. And then on the last couple pages, it just so you have a record of it, it shows that they assessed this property for the full extra 33 feet for the street. So the city, at that time in 1985, they verified that they did not own the street, that it was owned by the property owners. And this is a public record. So when I bought the property, and the previous owner assumed that the street was vacated. I've got a copy of the original plans, and on this street here where it says survey, it says, on the survey it says that, and I called the city surveyor, and he said the street was vacated. And so I assumed the city surveyor knew what he was doing. And then later on, I talked to him like a month later, and he says, well, it's vacated, but we can't find any records, but back in the 1900s, we don't know if we had good records. It could have been vacated, and nobody recorded it. But he says, as far as we know, it was vacated on my original plans. On this, I've got the original plans on this page. It shows right up here, it shows that Newton Street vacated, and then it shows the trees, and it lists the trees in there. So, and then here's another map that was on the city's website right here, the last page. And it doesn't show any street there. It shows that the property lines, the two owners go back and forth to each one. So as a buyer, and the previous buyer and the previous owner of the property all assumed, so you got the Wilcox attorney that lived there, he assumed that it was vacated, and then next, all the previous owners after that all assumed it was vacated and the city assumed it was vacated. So, and until this idea was brought up about the, if this thing about vacating the sewer were never brought up, we wouldn't be here, because the city assumed for the last 100 years that it was vacated. And when they can't find it because they can't keep, we were told by numerous people that back in the 1900s, maybe the records weren't as good as they are now. And so just because they can't find the records, adverse possession, the property owners for 100 years have been maintaining that, putting sprinkler systems in there, planting trees, shoveling the snow, paying assessments, paying the taxes, but now all of a sudden, wow, we're gonna take it back, because we can. But I mean, Pat was there and he looked at the property this week, and I mean, I don't know if he can tell you that it's a steep bank there. In order to get a bike trail, it seems impossible. And the cost to acquire property behind all these houses, none of the owners of the houses are willing to let you buy their properties, because what it would be is the Immermans on the corner, in order to get a bike trail through them, you'd have to go take their pool out. And they've been there a number of years. And then I used to live at the River's Edge apartment, that's right on the water. And there's no reasonable way to get a bike trail through there at a cost. I mean, I think you could spend money in a better way than spending $5-6 million to get a bike trail for this little section. And besides that, it's not even on your comprehensive plan for any kind of trail here. And all the owners for the last 100 years assumed that that was their property. So I mean, it's a perfect case if this doesn't go a better way, is to sue for adverse possession. Because I mean, everybody's been maintaining it, and I don't think just because the city can't find the records or didn't find them, can't find them, that all of a sudden this should be public property. Is there any questions?
Any questions?
What the question that Mr. Dahl asked, what's your last name again?
Smets.
Of Mr. Smith's, about just that section right by the water as an easement.
Well,
That 33 feet, so the
If
your
there was
33 feet, like
an
20
easement
feet
like right here, because I know it's never gonna be a bike trail, because you can never afford it. So if this was an easement, and the city does not have an easement for a walkway here, I would agree with that. But I mean, I would never bought the property if I was thought it was gonna turn into a public access. I mean, we got enough people sleeping, homeless people sleeping on Thorpe Drive. I don't need somebody sleeping in my backyard.
And I don't think that anyone's talking about any time in the future,
Well,
near future, that this would.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to sell it if.
No, I know, just, it would be 50, 100.
I mean, what you're doing is devaluating the property by vacating the street too. So I mean, I would think that if they ever did that, they would have to give the property owners a reduction in taxes, because when we bought these properties, we were told by the city and by the previous property owners that it was a vacated street. I mean, the city city surveyor even said that. And I can't believe him, just because the records can't be found, the city assumed it, because they weren't paying for the special assessments.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to this?
I think the other thing just to keep in mind that Marston Avenue is right up to the water too, so there's no road.
My name's Lisa Askinson. I live at 104 Wilcox Street. I'd like to just put a little perspective of this and the fact of parks and waterways in the city. I was involved in the Chippewa River Trail project where we look at safety in the water and things like that. And during that time, the Water Street Bridge was redone. And we wanted to have the city take a look at the side by Owen Park, opposite the river, that I look out my kitchen window every day in my yard. And that is beautiful access to the river. And we could not get the time of day for people in the city to put in a public beach there and keep the road for the fire department to have access there when people needed to be rescued. To have this conversation about possibility of a bike trail going in this location when we have vast areas on the other side of the river and other parts of the river is really a step back to think about the city that we live in and how things have possibly changed on a plat map within the last year in order to have this conversation. People for 100 years have thought that this property was owned. When we purchased our property, and I moved in July 1st, I had no question in my mind that my neighbor was Ray and Anton and not the city of Eau Claire. The city of Eau Claire was not my neighbor on the lot line at all. So I think the Parks and Waterways should really look at the beautiful areas that we have, take a couple steps back, and look at across the river at Owen Park. Let's get a public beach there. I would love to have that as a public beach in my neighborhood. I ride the bike trail every day. It's a beautiful bike trail on that side of the river. We need to be looking at the future of the next generations to be able to afford what we're putting in place today. And please keep that in mind as you go forward. The answer to the question that you raised is I would not give permission and agree with that on my part of the property of giving an easement for the city at this time.
Did you just point on, is your property on this map here?
Right here.
Okay, that one there, okay. Thank you for the clarification. Is there any other members of the public that would like to speak to this matter? Seeing none, for point of order, Pat or Jeff, the motion here would be to
Recommend approval.
recommend approval,
Vacation.
and then
If there's any motions to amend or add,
that would be made.
that would be made before you make the final vote on that recommendation to approve.
Okay, so motion be made, and then if anyone would want to make that amendment, it would be at that point.
Before you do your final vote.
Yes, after the initial motion.
To discuss after
Well,
the motion.
Yeah, you should move it so you can
Okay.
discuss.
Very good. Is there a motion to recommend approval of vacation to the portion of Newton Street from Wilcox to the Chippewa River?
So
Kirk moved, Tom second.
Wait, do we second before we?
now your discussion.
Now there's open
goes
for
in-
discussion. Is there any discussion on this matter? John?
I still like the idea that the city maintain that portion and have the, to only use it for future, because we don't have any plan right now, mean that we don't plan anything in the 50 years from now. So we still have the option, say, one day the new generation want to use it, they don't have to go and buy or ask the two adjacent property to sell back to them in case they want to use the river. If we have, if we are planning, say, 10, 20 years from now, we will do something, then it will be a different story. But at this point, for me personally, I still like the idea that city own, still maintain it and allow the adjacent property to use it.
Matt, just to clarify, so what John's saying, that would be vacation with the trail easement? No,
He's gotta make a
I'm
motion.
sorry. I'm just asking, I'm clarifying.
Not vacation of that.
Okay, so
Encourage.
so you not vacation permanent easement for the part, thank you for clarification.
So we would vote, in order to do that, we would vote no, but make a recommendation to the council for permanent encroachment, is that right?
So
Well, right now, you're under discussion. I think
Yeah,
Johnny's
you're in
comment was
discussion.
just a discussion. It was not an amendment. It was just his opinion on the
Okay,
motion.
is there any other discussion on the main motion? Tom?
We've got two different issues going here. We have two issues. Let's just take this situation and put it in Putnam Heights. Two property owners thinking that they know where their lot line is. All of a sudden, they find out, oh no, your lot line is 33 feet going in. Let's put that in Putnam Heights and let's leave the river out of it. You know, how would we decide? And we wouldn't be involved because it's not a park or a waterway, but somebody would decide. And it just seems to me that having the Chippewa River there makes this more complicated, but it really shouldn't. In my view, you get two property owners who, in good faith, have felt their lot line is here. For many, many years, they're not the only ones, previous owners felt the lot line was there. And now, why, just because it's next to the river, the city is saying, well, we really can't be giving this, we can't be vacating this. So if this were to happen in Putnam Heights, I think this would go that quick and there would be no discussion. Right, it's not in Putnam Heights, it's by the Chippewa River. But let's be realistic. First of all, a bike trail or sit-back trail probably isn't going to be there. And if it is, there's going to be a lot of money spent. And the fact that the city has to spend a little bit more for 66 feet, it's a drop in the bucket, given all the purchases that they would have to make. So let's do right by these property owners who come here in good faith and who have maintained their property in good faith, and just grant their request, grant the date vacation.
Is there any further discussion?
Question, so did you propose an official amendment or is that?
No, just still discussions. Not proposal yet, and just the kind of discussions.
Pete?
Things like this have come up in the time that I've been on council where, you imagine like what's happening 100 years ago and it's not really that hard to imagine that things would have gone wrong and gotten lost. And I can appreciate the frustration of that, certainly with the applicants and also with the staff. But I really do think that like our city and our national government is guided by documentation and by decisions made by councils and decision-making bodies, and I think that I think that this I don't think that we can just say, well, this is how it's always been assumed and so we should just do this, especially since this granting this this vacation would be going against our comprehensive plan, which is a plan that is taken really seriously to guide how our city is developed, and is used to look long range into the next 50 or 100 years. And so I really see this decision that we're making as not like a today's decision. There's no way that we would go tomorrow and build a trail on this land, but we have no idea what our city is going to be like in 100 years or even 50 years or 25 years. And so I really think that I'm going to be voting no to vacate, and to hold consistent with our comprehensive plan as a value that we owe it to our citizens to be able to be having access to the river. That's been a long time value of ours. But I would support an easement, I think, or an encroachment.
Yeah, encroachment.
Like what John said. I guess that would be my first choice. I think I could warm up to the idea of vacating with a trail easement, though. That would be my second choice.
I think I'm just going back a few months when we talked about the property up, just what is that apartment building that they, the Seavers. I feel like, I think I asked the question then, why is you know, why did that go up for sale and the city not buy it if that's part of our comprehensive plan, which it is. But we didn't because it was already said that was not going to happen, the trail was not going to happen. And so I just feel like we're just picking and choosing, and because maybe it's possible that this was never vacated. I don't understand why it would have gone forward this way for 100 years, but whatever. It's the city and there's lots of things that can fall through the cracks. But I would say also, I don't know, it seems like we're picking and choosing. And I don't know that that's fair to property owners in our city. But I do think that to keep with the comprehensive plan, and because we're the Parks and Waterways, that we should keep a small section of that as an easement. Just not a path, but just right there by the river.
Very well. My 2 cents worth would be that whether the paperwork initially was lost or not, nobody, the city, the property owners haven't cared for 100 years that it's privately occupied. It hasn't come up as an issue. I think if a river trail were to be built, there would be access off of Marston Avenue. It would be almost impossible not to have access to a trail like that off of Marston. What I heard from Mr. Smets and Mr. Mogensen was that a reasonable compromise would be to allow an easement along the river. I would be in favor of that and not an easement from Newton Street down to the river. So I would plan to propose an amendment to just vacate, or we're voting on a vacate. I would vote to vacate, but the amendment would be for the city to retain an easement along the river. And don't specify what the future use might be, because who knows, it might be for some weird magnetic levitation train or something. So, yes.
100 years, it never happens.
Do you have any other discussion on the motion?
I'll just say that if you maintain a strip along the river there, you still have to get the permission of the adjacent property owners to build a trail. It's no sense in having a trail that's 66 feet long. If they're going to give their permission to go across their property, they're going to give permission to go across the extra 33 feet as well. It's ridiculous to divide it all up like that. And I'd like to say these people have been very good stewards of the land. In my opinion, I commute by there. Things are nice and green along their yards and back there. I'm in favor of them continuing to maintain the property as they have.
Sorry, Kirk, wasn't it?
He said,
So,
thinking about it, I don't think he actually proposed one.
okay, so my amendment, I propose an amendment stating that the city retains an easement of some width. You have to help me with what the width should be, but retain an easement paralleling the river, adjacent to the river.
Wide enough for a trail.
15 feet.
Probably should throw some number in there. I don't know what the number should be, 30 feet, 40 feet,
20 feet from top of it.
20 feet.
Trail widths typically are 12 feet. That would give a little distance between the trail and the bank and steep, and then to blend into the yards. That'd be a round number.
20 feet.
So Kirk, you're saying that you propose a motion that the city retain an easement of 20 feet from the top of the river bank?
I'm not parliamentarian, but don't we have a motion on the table, on the floor? Don't we need to vote on that first?
I think we have to
Well,
make
you
an
can't do the
amendment
amendment
first.
too before you can actually vote it. You can't amend it after the fact.
So, yeah,
you-
move secondary discussion, I propose an amendment, I think we vote on that.
And then
go
if
back
we-
to the
if it-
original.
You
If
gotta
it doesn't
vote, you need
say-
to, okay, so the motion is to amend with a easement on top of the bank, 20 feet from the high water level, from the top of the bank, I think it was top of bank. So now
Okay,
it opens up,
motion to,
you should,
by rule, there should be a second
Yes.
to that.
Okay, so Kirk has
second
moved it, or the
And
second.
then it opens up for
Is
discussion.
there discussion on
And
this?
then when
amendment?
discussion is done, then you vote on the amendment, and then that takes you back to the original proposal, the recommendation to approve the vacation.
So while we're discussing it, we now are thinking about a 20-foot by 66-foot piece of property along the river that the city wants to maintain.
No, I think,
Would
I think the amendment was that it would be privately owned, but there's an easement for future trail
Right.
if we would decide on that.
I'm not seeing that at all. You're voting to maintain a city easement there, and that means that the city will maintain that property.
No, it's an easement, so they have rights to it, but rights to access, or I'm not sure the right terminology, but they don't have to.
We just heard if we maintain the extension of Newton Street, that the city would be responsible for maintaining that. That's what you said.
Yeah, but we're not.
It's if you exercise that option.
So we have currently a utility easement underneath, so the property owners mow the lawn on top, and with that, the easement underneath, like when we have utility easements underneath in XL Energy, it gives you the right underneath, but it doesn't obligate the city to maintain the top. So the trail easement here would allow the construction of a trail, but it doesn't give the city any other rights. The city doesn't give the city utility rights, it doesn't give the city storage rights or parking lots. It's for a specific purpose.
Okay, so discussion on the proposal that Kirk had moved, John.
I still think that I would disagree with that. I think that we vacate the Newton Street, then we don't need to keep the trail back to the river, because there's no sense that, like mentioned, like the property owner mentioned, we will not spend millions of dollars to buy that bike trail in there. I think that if we keep the Newton in play, then we just will do that. But then we would just vacate the Newton assets already, then we don't need to keep, the 12-foot and by the river bank. That's what my opinion, I think,
Further discussion on this motion? On this amendment? Sorry, Meredith?
I'm just trying to understand.
Okay. I think the initial motion is to recommend vacation, and then Kirk has added to retain an easement of 20 feet on top of the bank, in addition to vacating a portion of Newton Street. That's the nested level we're at right now, I think.
So we'll vote on the amendment
First we vote on the amendment.
I don't think it's been seconded.
We're still
I second.
Okay.
We're still discussing it, so I'm
Okay.
entertaining any further discussion on this amendment?
It just seems to me that we're dealing with 66 foot strip. And if we got to the point where the city was going to put a trail in there, all right, at 66 feet that the city does not have to purchase. But at the expense of having two property owners that feels violated, if that happened on my property, I'd feel violated. Two property owners who pay an awful lot of taxes, own two really nice homes in a nice part of town. All of a sudden now, people come in and say, well, you really don't have total control over this. I just think that, if we get to the point down the road where we want to put a trail in there, then go buy 66 more feet. But it's not worth the ill will that we're creating by having an easement. At least the ill will, and I'm trying to project how the owners feel, and I would feel some ill will with this.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it happening to my property exactly either, but I hear them saying it's a reasonable compromise and it's impossible to build.
Yeah.
Some.
Other half is gonna be
Oh, okay.
compromise.
I still think that if we, maintain the Newton, then we can, man would be better, it would be good. But if we vacate the portion of Newton, then there's no asset there. It's no sense that we keep that 20 feet in there, just the city is the owner, but, in the future we have to buy from there, back there, and we have no asset into it. I don't think that's a good idea. Unless we maintain Newton, then we will keep it.
Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Pat, if we did this amendment, just for clarification for the bigger picture, if we had the easement rights after vacation, it would still require the purchasing of all the other property eventually to even construct this, a trail through there in the future. But we currently don't have any other rights above or below along the river.
Yeah, we're just talking about the 66 feet along the river. It doesn't apply to any of the other properties.
Right, but we currently don't have any other, we don't currently don't have any of those rights. It would only be this section here, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So it seemed like if we vacated and then, because of the trail easement, it seemed like some of the applicants here seem to be liberal with that. It would intentionally give them the property they think they've already had, but then always, looking 30, 40, 50 years down the future, they'll maintain the goal of having access to the river, but they would still have full rights and use of as they do now. So it seems like that's the best compromise. In essence, if I'm understanding correctly, the property owners would have full control of their property as they always thought they have, but we would still long term.
Except for they couldn't build a permanent structure on that 20 feet. The 33 by 20.
Right.
Nobody's building that close to the river.
Exactly.
That's in a setback area.
So it's not setback there, so you couldn't build there anyway. So in essence, it seemed like that'd be, to me, the best compromise, that they get their property and the city still keeps its comprehensive plan intact and seems to be a win-win, I think. So is there any further discussion on this? Is there any further discussion on this amendment?
Not to go on forever here, but is it the city's feeling that by vacating, we're just dotting the i's and crossing the t's for some paperwork that may have been lost 100 years ago? Or is it more the city's contention that, oh gee, we still own it, and so if we vacate, that's like a whole new deal?
I don't know what happened 100 years ago. I think it's entirely possible that it could have been vacated. In the past, it's possible that it could have been just a map. Somebody just arbitrarily did it. So I don't know what happened, but as far as this right here, it is what we're trying to do is create an official record of that property there. So since it does have some issues with the comprehensive plan, it isn't something to that we wanted to lay all the issues out for that, because ultimately it's a council decision that we'll have to vote on that. So if this was in the Putnam Heights, it would be more of a formality, but we would still bring it to the council, but we probably would be recommending approval if you didn't have those issues with the comprehensive plan, unless it was next to a park or something like that. So it would be much more mundane, straightforward. We wouldn't be here because it wouldn't affect that. So, I mean, we're not bringing it back because we're planning an active access to the river. We're bringing it back because we want to clarify what the official legal situation with this property is, spelling out, hopefully spelling out non-biased, what the property owners have been doing and paying for the last 100 years and what the comprehensive plan says. And then ultimately it's the elected officials' duty to weigh those pluses and minuses of both of those, so.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's.
Well, it's really
helps or-
tough. So if the private property owners own it, then we're done. And if the city owns it, I would be wanting to retain that easement along that stretch. And who knows what the right legal thing is. I would think, from a legal standpoint, that you'd win an ironclad case of adverse possession without any problem. But since there's a dispute about who really owns it, that I'd proceed with what I suggested.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, I'll read once more. Kirk has proposed that, so the motion is to recommend vacation, and then Kirk's amendment, which we will vote on separately, is that the city retain an easement of 20 feet from the top of the riverbank. Okay, please vote by a show of hands. All in favor of? It's going to be seconded, and there's no further discussion. So, do you have any more discussion? Okay. So, by a show of hands, all in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Just a second, let me write the names down.
Oh, sure, sorry.
So Meredith, Kate, Josh, and Kurt.
And all opposed? And you need a majority to carry?
So that motion fails on a 4-4 vote.
Okay. So Kirk's amendment failed, and we are now back to the main recommendation to approve vacation. Now at this point,
Unless there's another.
yeah, so I will open up for further discussion, seeing how that motion failed. Is there any more discussion on the main motion?
I want to amend it, say that we maintain the Newton assets and then give the owner property the right encroachment to use it that, because that's what
Wouldn't
I
that
think
be
is 50 years
The
from now.
opposite.
Sorry, go ahead, John. Please
Yeah.
finish.
I'm thinking that because that's amended, because I'm thinking not today and tomorrow, I think about 50 years from now, you know, the city will be access back to the river.
Okay, so are you making an amendment proposal
Yes.
that?
I think,
Postpone
I think
vacation.
if I can suggest, it seems like what you're suggesting is that we vote down, but then make a recommendation to the council to make a permanent encroachment.
Yes. Yeah.
So it wouldn't be an amendment, is that?
This is another amendment, right?
Well, I think otherwise, why don't you vote on the main motion, and depending on how that goes, you could make another motion if you chose to do so.
I thought we couldn't do that.
Agreed.
But our motion is to
Yeah.
vacate. His motion would be not to
If
vacate
you,
and to.
if you vote on the main motion, you can't make a
Once
motion.
one of my motions is done, you can't amend it. So
So you could
I think
make
the amendment might seem contrary, and then you just go the other way on the main one. Is that how that would work? Or
So if I'm hearing Councilmember Ward correctly, I think he wanted to make an amendment, a motion that would have a permanent encroachment.
Not to vacate the Newton portion and allow the property owner to use that encroachment pass along the, whenever we are develop, we still maintain that.
A permanent encroachment, but not a vacation.
Yes.
That's what I.
That can only happen if the first motion fails.
Well,
They can't coexist.
okay, this question of parliamentary procedure. If we voted for this, and then we would vote not to vacate, how that would. If that's the path that Councilmember Lawrence can be taking here.
Isn't it just like another amendment? I amended, we vote that down, another amendment's being proposed, we can vote that down.
Right, yeah, so, okay, I guess we'll wait and see if that's, okay.
We want to
Get
vote on
ourselves,
John's
okay, let's discuss.
proposal first.
Is there a second to this amendment? Kate seconds it. Okay, is there discussion on the amendment to not vacate but permanently allow permanent encroachment on the right of way.
I think you just flat out vacate that section. I mean, clearly they've had possession of that property and function with that property. If they lose their private possession of that property, it's a much bigger impact than if they lose that 20 feet next to the river. And if we really needed access to some potential future trail, you're going to have it off of Marston.
Other discussion?
Yeah, I think I was talked into Kirk's choice as my first choice, but this is my second choice. I feel strongly that the city should have rights to either in ownership or in easement, and so like if this would fail, I would vote against the original amendment. But again, I think this is my second choice. I would say.
And I would say in response that then they should pay for it. I mean, for possibly 100 years, that has just been owned by the private person. So the city, if they want that 66 feet, then they should pay for it. It seems to me the city, in some ways, is wanting something for nothing. So I'm not opposed. I mean, if it comes down that the city fathers want to build and the city leaders want to build a trail, great. I'm okay with it. But that 66 feet, seems to me that they should pay for that just like they're going to pay for everything else that goes on that trail.
Any further discussion on the amendment? It's been moved and seconded. So, all in favor of the amendment to not vacate but allow permanent encroachment for the property owners, please vote by raising your hand.
Well, that amendment fails by a 5-3 vote.
Okay, so we are now back out to discussion on the main motion to approve vacation of the portion of Newton Street. Is there any further discussion? Currently there are no amendments, it'll just be the main motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, it has been moved and seconded, so we will now move. So a vote in favor would be to recommend vacation. So all in favor, please vote by show of hands. And all opposed?
That motion passes.
Motion passes, so Warwick Park Commission has recommended approval of vacation from portion of Newton Street. Alright, item C on new business. Discussion of future meeting locations from Jeff.
Yes, we are nearing the completion of the new city hall. And with that, there's an opportunity to either move back to the North Conference Room for our monthly meetings, or the other option is stay here, or the other thought that we've done in the past is maybe look at some other venues within our park system to have meetings. We do have some conference rooms at Hobbs that would work out if there were smaller meetings. We didn't have many people, but that way is to get the group out to some of the other facilities that are served under the Waterways and Parks Commission. So what I'm looking from the group is, do you have a strong feeling either way?
Mary?
I like to go in the conference room. I feel like this is amazing. It just feels way further away. I know it's not that far, but I like to be there.
City halls can be really pretty too.
Yeah.
So we're gonna want to be.
Second.
If you don't have only, but I'm just trying to get your emotion.
I'm getting a littmus test here, so.
I like the North Conference Room. I think, we report to City Council should be in the City Hall, seem to be appropriate meeting spot. Although we have in the past, during the summer, amongst perhaps tourists, I think 9 months of the year we can meet there, maybe look from time to time going elsewhere, but for a permanent
And
place, I would recommend North Conference
as
Room.
far as people finding this, like there are lots of signs, so it's not that hard, but still, just the ease of getting there is important for the public, I think.
Okay, so I got that plan on our next meeting in September that we'll have it back at the North Conference Room. So we'll make sure we message that out so everybody knows that they don't accident. You may by habit just come here and then you realize that you see no cars.
You should put a sign out there.
We'll put a sign.
Lazy Monk has a meeting room too. It's on the waterways.
So, and I do believe that you will appreciate all the work that has been done at City Hall, and Mr. Solberg and his staff are to be commended for putting that building that's over 100 years old back into a more of a historical look. I mean, it's got some contemporary look to it, but I think you'll be impressed if you haven't been there already.
Yeah, the open house looks really modern, open and airy.
It's open. It
Open
has
area,
a-
not
has a name.
woody and carpeted and dark clothes. Next item on the list is another discussion on our meeting, is the 2019 special events list.
All right, as you can see from the special event list, August and September are very full. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but some of the things that are coming up this weekend, we got the Buckshot Run coming up. We have several other, the Labor Day picnic, and then also we have some things going on at Hobbs. We got the Hobbs for hockey, and then some homecoming stuff for both North and North. So if there's a special event you want to specifically talk about. Again, we're on record to have well over 100 special events this year in the city, and they continue to grow. So that's a good thing. It's certainly a challenge for the Community Services Department, Police Department, Fire Department, that we provide services for many of these special events, but it's a good thing to happen because it wasn't that many years ago we had significantly less special events going on in the city. So, okay.
Yeah, very good. Next item on the list would be the director's report.
Looking at the Parks Division, we do our annual move of the bleachers to the football stadium. We actually did that in record time this year. It was actually less than three days that we moved those bleachers from the baseball stadium over to the visitors side of the football stadium. We've been doing some work over on painting some overlooks and light fixtures on the trail adjacent to the South Dewey Street. Then we also installed a fence at the McDonough Park between the play equipment and the road area. We got a new area that the pickleball group just paved the roadway that goes back to the parking spaces by the pickleball courts, and because we have cars going through there now, we put a fence up there between the playground area for safety. An update on the forestry. Mr. Bodkin asked for a little update on what's going on out there at South Dewey. Tree Savvy has finished the first phase of the bank treatment, and 90% of what was moved was comprised of buckthorn, and some of these size of some of the buckthorn was 12 to 14 inches in diameter, so that's pretty significant for a buckthorn. Usually they don't get that large. We also removed Siberian elm, box elder, and honeysuckle. The stumps were treated last year with an agent that deters resprouting, but they came back on June 25th, and they had to respray those because they started seeing some new sprouting. We do expect that there's gonna have to be another spot dose done sometime later this year. The replanting of that area will be completed in the fall of this year, when weather remains favorable for the transplanting. Everything that they've done have been supervised by our city forester, and then certainly with the agreement that we have with Tree Savvy, they follow this, step by step what they're supposed to do.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
Well, when I went by the site there, I noticed at least, because I didn't go down the hill, but I noticed at least 16 stumps that were 12 inches or bigger in size. So there was a lot of large trees taken out of there. They say a lot of it was buckenhorn. And I have one in my yard that's pretty big, so I know they get that big. I can't tell what species the stumps were. But they were also, we talked about having a population of varying ages of trees on that hillside there. Everything that's under 12 inches is gone. There was not one favorable sapling to be salvaged, I guess. That's one point. Another point is they said they were going to plant in the spring. It was in their proposal, plant in the spring. So the spring came and went. I went over there and looked. I noticed no planting. That's the second point. The last point is, after my observations, I contacted Tiffany Weiss, that sends out the information. I said, let's get this on the agenda for a follow-up. I heard back from Jeff. He says, I'll include this in the director's report. And now I see Tree Savvy has written a progress report. So I don't know how the progress report came about from Tree Savvy, because I don't think if I'd made that comment about getting on the agenda, they would not have made a progress report. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but they're still keeping the planting in mind. I think if I hadn't have said anything, that the planting would never have been mentioned again. That's my comments.
Thanks for following up on that.
And I think that in general, there's a lot of clearing of trees along the river. If you look at the Severson building, there's not one piece of vegetation along the riverside there. And we built there's a big theater over here, Pablo. And after it was 90% complete, they were still taking down the massive poplars there. And they said, well, they needed that area for a bike path, which was a lie. The bike path didn't get anywhere near where the trees were. They just don't want the trees blocking their $50 million building, which is nice when the building's new, but after a couple of years you think, oh, a tree would be nice there. So, and that's why I joined this committee, because people are chopping down all the trees along the river or the roadside over here. So I'll continue to speak up for the trees. Thank you.
All right, and then also going on with forestry, they're still doing several of our tree prunings. We're finally caught up on stump grinding from our ash board for ash tree removals, and then also doing boulevard restorations. Recreation Division, the acrylic rink floor was recently poured in the new rink. We put some. The reason why we replaced that floor is that it was breaking up. We had no ability to prevent the frost from going deep into the ground. So all the new ice rinks that are being put in, they have basically a heating element to prevent the frost from going down and the floor from busting up, the concrete. That is in the curing phase right now. We're hoping to have an open house and a ribbon cutting sometime in October. Along with, at the same time, the artwork that the Waterways and Parks Commission recommended approval will be displayed at that time. So I'll make sure that each of you get an invitation to the ribbon cutting on that day. So with that, any questions on the fall and winter edition of Prime Times will be coming out here. I think it's coming out this week. So if you have any kids that want to get into registration and learn the programs, please get into the, we've got an online version that you get in and do your applications and registrations. That's it.
Any questions, comments for the director's report? If not, I would take a motion to adjourn. John, second. Kate, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire. A transcript of this meeting is available for the hearing impaired. It will be available within 7 days of this telecast. Call 715-839-4912 or TDD 715-839-1689. Or write Eau Claire City Clerk, P.O. Box 5148, Eau Claire, Wisconsin 54702-5148. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.